Yes, so thanks a lot for the invitation. And of course, I don't know how to have an ERC project, but I can only share some experience and my work. So just to present a little bit the situation. So I applied 2 times for one ERC Starting grant. The first time it was during my first postdoc, so 2 years after my PhD, and the second time was 4 years after my PhD. In the first proposal, I received a B, which means that I was not invited for the interview. And so I was invited during the second time. And luckily, I get this grant this second time. So I'm a political scientist. I work on public participation and the impact of public participation on the decision-making process and more broadly the functioning of democracy. And maybe one of the questions that can arise is what was the difference between my first try and the second one? And I can say that maybe there are 2 main differences. The first was my CV. So the first time that I applied, it was only 2 years after my PhD, and some of the reviewers mentioned that I had no real experience in the management of research team, and it was true. It was maybe still true 4 years later, but a bit less because I had a bit more experience. I could also explain more clearly in the proposal how I was involved in different projects, how I was involved in the organization of different research activities. Also became co-supervisor of 2 PhD students, so it was an evolution of my CV. And maybe the second evolution in my proposal was in the content. So I think that I can say that the main research question and the main idea was more or less the same, so the broad questions, but what was different was the hypothesis and the way to disentangle and unpack these big questions. So to exaggerate a little bit, in my first try, it was mainly an open question, but I had no clear idea of how to answer it. And in the second proposal, I think that it was much more clear, with much more clear potential responses and answer to my big research question. So in terms of how did I prepare these 2 applications, so it took me a lot of time, but the process was again a bit different between the first try and the second one, because during the first try I was mainly alone, and in the second one I did it in duo. Because one of my colleagues in my department of political science here at the University of Namur also applied to the same grant. We had not the same position because he has a position of professor, I mean, chargé de cours, and I was still a postdoc at that time. But we decided to collaborate a lot. And so the 3 months before the submission, we had one meeting per week. Usually it was during a Friday afternoon. And so we prepared together our proposal, and the end of the story is a happy end because we both received the grant. And to have this colleague, this duo was very helpful for lots of reasons. First, to have a real conversation with someone else, because usually you can get a lot of feedbacks from colleagues who can give you one-shot comments on one version of the draft, but usually that's very short and you don't have the time to really explain and reflect collectively about what you want to do. And usually I think that there are always different possibilities. Should I opt for this method? Should I need to divide this work package into elements, or should I combine or not different methods? And to have this conversation, you need someone who knows very well your proposal. So to have someone who can with whom you can discuss this was very helpful. It was also helpful to have a support, especially in the last day. It's a bit when you are in exam as a student, you need other colleagues to help you also for, I don't know, psychological support. And it was also very helpful to have deadlines because of these weekly meetings, I knew that I had to send something. Sometimes it was only just one paragraph. Sometimes it was a couple of pages, but I knew that I had a lot of deadline before the last deadline. And so when the FWO and FNRS asked me to imagine a couple of recommendations, they are related to this. So the first one is to try to not be alone in the preparation of the proposal. Try to have colleagues and potentially colleagues who also apply to the same grants, because you can collectively reflect about what is asked by the ERC and what are the criteria, how to respond to them. And so for me, it was very helpful to have colleagues who were in the same situation at the same time. The second one is to ask the help of the university. And in my university, the administration was very helpful, especially Christelle Saoud. And I think that she attended this meeting, but she was very, very helpful at all the different steps of the processes, all to help me to discover what the ERC wants, to imagine the organization of meetings with colleagues who could give me feedback, also to create the budgets, and to help me to write the explanation for the ethical issue. So she was very, very helpful. And so do not hesitate to ask the university administration to help. And maybe one last element is, if I have the time, which is more related to the content of the proposal. One advice that a couple of people that get an ERC gave me, which was, and this advice was very important to me, is that when you first realize what the ERC wants, they insist a lot on the innovative part, the groundbreaking nature of the research, the creativity, and you feel, I think, a lot of pressure because you have the feeling that you have to do by yourself one scientific revolution. And that's, of course, very difficult. And of course, these criteria are important, but it doesn't mean that all the methods, all the elements, all the argumentation need to be at the same time innovative. And maybe to be a bit more precise, it is not because in one paragraph, in one book, or if one single studies in one country that they tackle or that they address more or less the same kind of issue, that your project, because it's more systematic, because it puts this idea at the center of the research and not only as a side point, is not innovative. So yes, for me, it was also helpful to discover that we can be a bit relaxed with this idea, and that the whole argument should be innovative, but it's also normal that some element came up from other studies, and that everything from the start to the end is not innovative. So that's what I wanted to say, but I'm of course there for the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vincent. I don't know if there are specific questions for Vincent. You can write them so in the Q&A as you did before, and they will appear there. And so in the meantime, I can already ask you about the panel that you choose. So how did you make this decision? You decided straightforward that you were going to apply to one panel, or there were many things that you analyzed? And so what about this process?
Personally, I hesitated between two panels because when I looked at the keywords, it could fit, the different keywords could fit with my proposal, but I finally opted for the one that was more at the center of my research. So it was relatively clear for me, the choice of the panel, even if some keywords could relate to my proposal in other panels, but when I look at the whole project, it was quite clear.
Okay, okay, thank you. And I don't know if there are probably, so for sure, regarding the administrative part, there are many things that should be done together with your host institution. But I don't know if you at some time you probably felt that it was really essential to have them there. Is there a point in which, yes, of course, you should contact them?
Yeah, I think that's for 2 points for the budget. And these are clear implications for the kind of research you can imagine. And so to summarize, in my case, that's more or less 3 postdocs for 3 years or a bit more. So I knew that I had to imagine a project that could fit with this sort of team. So it was very helpful to get their feedback at this stage, and also for the ethical issue. So in my research, I conduct a lot of field work, interviews that raise a lot of questions in terms of anonymity, what I will do with the name of the people, etc. And there, that's always a bit difficult for us to know what we have to do. And so we have a contact point in our university for such issue, and she was very helpful to help me, not only to give me papers, but also to help me to write directly the few paragraphs I need to write.
Okay, okay, perfect. I think this is really useful. And I don't know if from the panelist side, you see some of the questions which can be addressed right now, and if not, yes.
There are some questions on how long did it take to write the proposal? It was 3 months writing full-time or part-time?
It was, of course, part-time. Some weeks it was 2 or 3 days a week, and other weeks it was only a couple of hours per week. But what was important to me is to have one deadline each week during the 3 months before the deadlines. And of course, the 10 last days before the submission were crucial. So there it was really full time. And so I knew it before, so I arranged my time to be able to have enough working time to devote to this.
Okay, great. So
there are more from the audience, I see.
I don't see them, Margot. I don't know why, but
okay. There's one. Do you have any specific tips about formatting parts B1 and B2? For example, putting information in tables, using bullet points, use of bold color, fonts, etc.
What I try to do is to be as clear as possible in the B1. So for those who know the distinction, so in B1, that's 5 pages, and you have to explain what you will do. What I try to do in this part is to not go too much in the details of the literature. So only present the big story, the big argumentation, but not explaining to what extent what I propose is really different from what A did and from what another team did. So I use this more for the B2.